Hello, everybody, and welcome again to another episode of the Risk Matrix with myself, Dr. Martin, and Mr. James Junkin. Hi,
Ma-
James.
Man, Mardi Gras season is over. Festival season is upon us. Warmer weather is here. I feel like a new human being. I really do.
I mean, I, I'm happy for you, James, but I live in the Northeast and warmer weather. I mean, I guess every once in a while we hit 40. So, I'm not with you there, but it should be coming. As you know, I'm a bicyclist and I can't wait to get out on the road because being on that trainer is a boring activity. But roll tide, we'll
Roll
move
Tide.
along, right? Softball season is here.
Softball season. Absolutely.
And we both like to watch those ladies play
I
softball,
do.
right? Because
I
they
do.
are some heck of an athletes. So I have a topic for us today.
Okay.
You ready for it?
Ready.
Okay, so let me do a little kind of like back explaining here. You know how we do risk registers, right? And we put on there severity, probability, right? And we kind of push the things off the register as we can put corrective actions in place or controls in place in order to lower the risk, right?
Right.
And on those risk registers, we have also high severity events, right? But they kind of languish towards the bottom. We never really address them because they're high dollar items. They practically never ever happen, if at all, right? Um, but I guess, what I want to talk about is what happens when those things do happen, right? Because um, you can plan all you want, you can reduce risk all you want, you can take everything else off the risk register except for those things that are super deadly, right? And the severity could have big consequences, but we know that's never going to happen, right? What happens when a black swan event occurs, right? How do you deal with it? Number one, and how do you deal with it in a way that it builds a resilient organization, right? What is the
And
process?
man, I
Dig
can't wait
in.
to get into this conversation. But first, thank y'all for joining us in this episode. We are powered by Veriforce. Let's get a word from our sponsor for this particular episode, and then let's delve into this one because this one's going to be interesting.
The Safety on the Edge Conference is a premier event that brings together academia, industry leaders, safety professionals, regulatory agencies, and experts to discuss and promote the latest advancements in safety technology, models, and best practices. The Safety on the Edge Conference is proud to sponsor Veriforce's Risk Matrix.
Veriforce is proud to announce the latest version of our Safeland USA accredited course called Basic Orientation 7.0. This is our flagship course that has been taken by over 1.6 million students nationwide. The newest version of this course is shorter than the last version, with condensed training and updated multimedia, but it still includes the same topics as previous courses. As always, the Safeland orientation remains with the employee through the career. It eliminates the redundancy of multiple orientations, and it stores all the training records in a single centralized database for everyone to use. Also, we offer two solutions for getting the training. You can either seek out Safeland training from one of our third-party providers, or you can send one of your instructors through our Train the Trainer program to teach your own employees. If you're interested in learning more, please contact our training sales department at 888-482-9101. That's 888-482-9101. Or you can email us at trainingsales@veriforce.com.
All right, welcome back. And James and I today we're going to talk about Black Swan events. We did a little explaining about this before we had a word from our sponsor. And basically, a Black Swan event is something that's extremely rare, but has severe impact. And a lot of time, well, let's hopefully say that those events are on our risk register, right? If they're not, you should take a good look at your risk register and put them on there, right? Just because they're extremely rare doesn't mean it's never going to occur, right? We never thought COVID was going to happen,
That's right.
but if we put it on our risk register and we really evaluated it, we would have saw that there was a flu pandemic in the early 1900s, right? That caused some of the same effects that we had. If we had learned from that, we could have improved our organization. So what I want to talk about, James, is what happens when those rare things occur.
Right.
First of all, how do we prepare for that? What happens when they occur, and how does it make a more resilient organization?
Well, I think more and more as we have applied a lot of the system safety theories, we have driven down workplace injuries. We have, we've had this discussion in the safety profession about plateauing in workplace fatalities, but comparatively over the years, I think we've turned the tide on that number, at least, in perspective. It's not zero, but it's not 20,000 a year either. Every life lost is a particular tragedy for that worker, for that family, and we have a lot still left to do to bring all workers home safe, right? But we're getting better at it. It's these black swan events that most companies are not prepared for. And as I do workplace assessments and speak at different conference events, interact on LinkedIn and social media, the smaller the organization, the less likely they have a risk register, and the less likely that they have considered all the particular risks, regardless of being of frequency and severity and all the things that go into establishing a risk matrix. Most people are just living day to day, right? They're trying to look at this job, this particular setting, these hazards that are right here and for my eyes. So I watched this show, Deadliest Catch, right? And Captain Phil Harris was my favorite captain. He's kind of old school, tatted up, smoked cigarettes all day long, drank coffee all day long, and he's dead now, probably because of that and all the stress. But he used to say this: there are three kinds of people in this world. The people that watch things happen, the people that make things happen, the people that wonder what happened, right? And I think you can apply that to the concept of exactly what you're talking about when it comes to risk. There are people that watch things happen. There are people who are proactive and make things happen and anticipate and utilize the tools that are available to. And then there's a bunch of people that just wonder what happened. And then the world is happening to them. So beginning with the concept of, hey, what are the potential risks that we have, even though they may be unlikely to occur or the probability is very low, it needs to be on some type of formalized process for discussion, and that's where the risk register comes in.
Okay, so it's on the risk register. Let's say, for sake of argument, it gets on the risk register, right? An event that has very low probability and severe consequences, right? Let's say it happens. Okay, it's not just about the event happening; it's about what happens as a result of that catastrophic event. And so what you might see is a cascade of risks occurring and bad things happening because of that catastrophic situation, right? You might see that things higher on the risk register, higher up that get more light of day and more discussion. They're happening, not just one of them, but all at once, right? So you have a cascade of things that can happen. So this is one of the reasons, like, you need to look at the black swan event, right? What happens when people are prepared for black swan events, right? Somebody who goes over it every year or whatever. I contend that it creates a more resilient organization, right? Because if we learn, we may take a downward hit, but our resilience will rebound several fold. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. It's the same thing that we've talked about before about barriers and defenses, and in particular occupational safety hazards in the workplace. Why do we have an exclusion zone around crane operations, right? So if our safety management system inspection process fails and we drop something, it doesn't result in catastrophe. You can see, and in my experience, this particularly well suited to natural disasters where you have a cascading event. Where we live on the Gulf Coast, hurricanes are becoming more frequent. They're becoming larger. The cost of recovery is escalating. And usually you see if you end up with some type of chemical plant, refinery, some type of process safety facility that's unprepared for the cascading event. There was a chemical, I think it was Hurricane Harvey, where they weathered the storm pretty well. What they didn't weather was the rain. Then they had flooding. They didn't anticipate the flooding that far inland. That disrupted a chemical process, which led to an explosion, which led to a chemical release, which led to further complicating all sorts of emergency response and then cleanup. So that wasn't on their risk register when it came to, hey, well, what's the likelihood we have flooding? I think particularly related to flooding, this misnomer of 100-year flood, sort of leads to some complacency and sort of takes us to that idea that this black swan event of flood is never going to happen. Just because it hasn't happened doesn't mean it can't happen. And what happens when it does happen? Fukushima, that's another good example.
Catastrophic failure with cascading events.
Absolutely.
Cascading consequences and high risk that couldn't be immediately mitigated, right?
And it's hard to get people to invest. Budgets are tight. Shareholders and stakeholders want returns. Getting someone to invest millions and millions of dollars in preparatory plan for something that may never happen is difficult, particularly if you have a large amount of turnover within the management team. That's an expenditure sometimes people want to kick down the road. I'm only going to be here as operations manager or president for the next 5 years. What's the likelihood that we're going to have this event that happens in the next 5 years under my tenure? Hey, I'm going to move that to somebody else down the road. And then the event happens and you're solely unprepared for it. So I think it's
so
why
are we putting these on our risk register, and why should we be looking at them, right? I think the number one reason is we put things on our risk register because, I guess someday flooding could happen in that situation, and it did, right? What we are doing as a society is we're creating more complex factors that surround our risk decisions, right? And our risk register. And so as those things change, whether it's, new AI, new technology, new thought process, new management, all those things are always changing. So are the things on your risk register, especially those things that you don't revisit very often, right?
Right.
So you need to build resiliency behind those potential black swan events, because planning for it when you first put it on the risk register is much different than a year or two down the road, right? Especially as society evolves.
That's where a good bow tie analysis, particularly when you're talking about critical systems, could come into play. Our reliance on technology is great because it allows us to do more things quicker, sometimes with greater accuracy, with less resources. But what if the technology fails? What if it fails? What if our energy sources fail during some type of event? All you got to do is cut on the news. Just cut on the news and look at the different natural disaster events that are going around, particularly the United States, but around the world. You just came out of all these fires that happened in Southern California, right? Well, what's coming next? Here comes the rain. Here comes the mud, right? So that should be, if you reside in Southern California, if you don't have wildfire and mudslides on your risk register, you know, I don't know what to tell you, because this is about like hurricanes on the Gulf Coast. This happens all the time and with greater frequency. So on
Can
the
we
risk,
predict when? No. Can we predict when? No. Can we predict
no,
that they will happen at some
absolutely.
point? Yes.
Absolutely. So what's our plan? And now we're into a business continuity type scenario. And
Absolutely.
really that's what, when we talk about these black swan events, sometimes we can prevent them, sometimes we can't, but building resiliency around that is a business continuity issue.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So when you talk about these natural disasters, right? Um, I'm just thinking, what comes next, the rain, like you said, but really what comes next are in the wildfires or in natural disasters, manufacturing is disrupted, transportation is disrupted, um, shortage of products it happens, right? We saw that during COVID. The ability to source things is disrupted. The whole supply chain goes down, right? And I know we talk a lot about safety, but we do talk about supply chain risks too, right? And
Yep.
if you have some type of catastrophic event, whether it's safety related or not, safety of personnel, you will have disruption of the supply chain, and that again goes back to business
But
continuity.
we saw what happened with disruption of supply chain during the pandemic. And I think the one thing that did not exasperate the supply chain disruption was that pause where a lot of employers furloughed their employees and we sheltered in place at home for a little bit, right? And so there wasn't a huge demand upon the supply chains for operations because people weren't going out and buying, consuming at the rates that they were, right? And we sort of weathered that. I don't know if we learned all the lessons we need to learn from that. Now, I don't do politics, you know that, right? And that's not the show for it. But we also live in a political world where the actions of politicians and our governments
Global events,
have
global events.
global events have impacts around the world. So whether you're pro tariff, anti tariff, no tariff, whatever, that's well beyond the discussion for this show, but it is reality, right? If certain tariffs go into place, what's that going to do to my supply chain? That's a black swan event. That's something that you can forecast. That's something you need to be prepared for. Maybe it impacts critical safety critical equipment that I import in. If I'm in the healthcare sector, we saw during COVID the ability to get antibiotics and other drugs from an extended supply chain that went to Asia. That was something that rose. It came up as an issue. So all these things that you hear, even though I say I don't do politics, don't be immune and stick your head in the sand to where you're just like, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to see it. It's frustrating because world events can overtake you. Cyber. If you use technology, cyber needs to be on your risk register. The worst thing that can happen to me and my company as an organization is we wake up tomorrow and I go turn these computers on and we've been hacked and all our data's gone.
Right.
Or we've got ransomware. What's your backup plan for that? If we had to go to paper, could we in a short period of time?
So what helps with all those things, right? Getting it on your risk register, first of all, doing regular reviews, right? And having a business continuity plan. But communication, right? How are we going to react? Who's going to gather the intel to help us make the right decisions, right? Because a lot of time we're very lax at gathering the intel when we're in a period of not having any events going on. But then when an event happens, who's gonna mobilize, right? And should we have been looking at these things beforehand so that we could have had some intuition, let's say, about events that happen, right?
Well, it's too late to draw it up in the dirt once something happens. right? So planning, practicing that plan, being able to execute that plan. But we used to have this saying in the military: no plan survives the first enemy contact. So when the shooting starts, you have to be able to adapt. You have to be able to improvise. That's where you've got plan Bs and plan Cs and decentralized command, and have trained people what your strategy and expectations are so they can be nimble. That's the same thing true in the business community and in occupational safety and health. Being able to pivot. If this doesn't
You can
work,
only pivot if you have the right information, or pivot well. You can pivot, right? But you can only pivot well if you have the right information at your fingertips, right?
no.
And that's why people train.
Well, look
That's
at Chernobyl. That was an example of poor pivoting. They continued to pivot and they made the situation worse. And so I doubt that was on their risk register of actions to take. And it was a lot of top-down politics behind the Iron Curtain at that time. They helped influence some of those decisions. But we can be in the same boat when it comes to these events. Now, whatever the cause, I see this all the time. I see it in well-run organizations that have good plans and well-run organizations that do things well operationally, but don't plan for the worst day of their life, which is when a worker doesn't come home. How you respond in that first 24 hours is critical, because you have to make notification to OSHA within 8 hours. You have to make sure that this is not going to be a cascading event, that other people are made unsafe, injured, made sick. It gets beyond your fence line, your ability to control, and these cascading events that we've been talking about. You have to have notification of the family. You got to deal with the psychosocial mental health of your workforce, maybe other contractors. There's probably going to be an investigation. There may be litigation concerns. There are a ton of decisions that need to be made, and made quickly, including the preservation of evidence, the accident scene, who's going to do the investigation. Is it a protected investigation under attorney-client privilege? Look, when you're under the gun, it's too late to draw it up in the dirt. And I've seen well-funded, really good organizations that have a catastrophic event like that handle it very, very well, because they already know you're calling OSHA. You're going to deal with the local authorities that come in as far as police, fire, etc. You're going to be the one that contacts our outside counsel and begins a third-party investigation. You're going to be the one that helps organize counseling services and things of that nature for the mental health of the workers that were impacted. If we've got people in the hospital, we're going to make sure they're getting the appropriate care. We have a plan in place. I've seen companies breeze through this, even though there's not been a live fire drill when this has occurred in many, many years, if ever. Then I've seen the opposite, where we forget to call OSHA. We're late on notification. Word gets out. Families find out through social media. The accident scene is disturbed. So it greatly impacts our investigation and coming up with all the causal factors for this particular incident. Why do we have? Because we don't have a plan. We never.
So let me help you distill that, right? You're talking about reaction, okay? There's a fine line between reaction, appropriate reaction, overreaction, and underreaction, right? And that's the tightrope that James is talking about, is basically, do you have the communication in place, the stakeholders in the right spots, the plans, the processes, the line of evidence, everything that you need? Is it in line to make good, proactive, reactive decisions, right? Do you have those in place so that you know what to do and you can execute? If you don't execute, you're underreacting. If you over execute, things happen like happened in Chernobyl, right?
Right.
Or in Fukushima, right? People are just reacting for the sake of reacting, and overreacting can cause cascading events, right? Which we saw in those disasters and in others. So, I mean, I just wanted to bring to the forefront, James, that stop looking at your risk register as here are the things that I can knock off my risk register because they are high probability, low severity, or medium, right? Those high severity and low probability, they do happen, right? If we study history, if we study events, if we, take the last 100 years, you can see even the highest improbability, right? We see them happening. Now, the regularity, right, is off by like 100 years. Every 100 years we have something like a flood event or whatever, but it does happen. And so we do need to be looking at those and prepare to be an organization that when there's a downturn, we hit a trampoline and we hit resiliency and we go up in our ability to respond to these things, that we don't hit something and fall through, because that's the worst thing that can happen to a business. That's the worst thing that can happen when responding when people are in danger.
I'll give you an event that I did not think was ever going to be on my risk register, but I have to prepare for. Low probability, high severity, the Auburn Tigers winning a basketball national championship. I was not prepared for that. It's not a foregone conclusion, but they are the ranked number one team in basketball for a reason. And it looks like it could happen. It could happen, right? So the probability, but it was low, but it's definitely the severity.
So what's your contingency plan for that, James?
Football.
Softball.
Football season. No, but they're having an outstanding year. And I'm kind of making light of a situation, but it really begins with sitting down and thinking about the risk. And most companies that I do business with have not done that. There's not a process to do that. If they have done it, it's been very informal. You really have to get into larger organizations sometimes to have a risk register at all, or a process of conversation. So safety professionals that are listening to me, hey, now there's no better time than the present to start. But risks aren't just the risk you come up with. There are risks outside of occupational safety and health. There's financial risk, like we talked about, that can impact safety. That
can cascade into safety, right?
Absolutely. What's the first thing gets cut when you have a downturn?
Safety.
I'm not saying it should be, but most organizations, they cut back on safety coverage, safety training, PPE, things of that nature. Cyber risk, which is external to your organization, can have great impacts. Now that we're incorporating AI, there's risk there. We had a whole episode on the risk, the ethical and moral risk of AI within your organization. So, hey, don't be afraid to get other people's opinions when you're trying to develop a risk register. It may start with you, but it needs to expand out throughout your organization. Remember, safety,
all the stakeholders,
for all the stakeholders that are involved, and that can also mean your key suppliers within your supply chain.
Right. Well, James, I think that was a good discussion that we had today on black swans and risk registers. If anybody would like to discuss it at greater length, you can find us on LinkedIn, both of us on LinkedIn. We also post this to our YouTube channel, which is Veriforce's YouTube channel. You can go there, like, subscribe, comment, get a response. Please tell us what you like, what you don't like. If you have some ideas of things that we should talk about, or if you'd like to come on the show, let us know. We're also on Spotify, and every Tuesday around noontime, a episode drops. You can get that sent right to your phone by liking and subscribing, and it'll show up on your phone. You can listen at your lunchtime or whenever you feel like having a little bit of the risk matrix. So James, you want to take us out?
Hey, thank you all for listening to us. We do this for you. I really like when I get messages on LinkedIn. Hey, I found you on LinkedIn after listening to an episode of the Risk Matrix. Hey, we appreciate it. That's why we do this. We hope it inspires you. We hope it informs you. We hope it spurs conversations within your organization to try to get workers home safe from high hazard jobs. So thank you for what y'all do as practitioners within our profession, and keep bringing those workers home safe. Until next time, roll tide.
Tide.